When you think of the legends of the American Revolution, a few key moments probably spring to mind. We all know about the defiant stand at Lexington and Concord, the desperate crossing of the Delaware. And of course, we'll never forget the brutal, soul-crushing winter at Valley Forge, where the Continental Army was pushed to the absolute brink. But while we remember the suffering of that winter, we often forget what happened right after. We forget about the transformation. In the summer of 1778, the army that marched out of Valley Forge was a force reborn. They were hungry for a chance to prove that all their suffering hadn't been for nothing. As the massive British army abandoned Philadelphia for a slow, almost arrogant march across New Jersey, they figured they'd just swat away the rebels like they always did. They walked into a furnace. They expected an easy fight. They were dead wrong. This is the story of the Battle of Monmouth, the grueling, overlooked battle fought on the longest, hottest day of the year. A battle that would become a crucial turning point in the Revolutionary War. The year 1778 changed everything for the American war effort. The stunning American victory at Saratoga the year before had done more than just capture an entire British army. It had convinced France to officially jump in as an American ally. Suddenly, Great Britain wasn't just fighting a colonial rebellion. It was fighting a global war, forced to defend its valuable colonies in the West Indies and beyond. This new reality put the main British force, which had been comfortably chilling in the American capital of Philadelphia, in a very awkward spot. Their new commander, Lieutenant General Sir Henry Clinton, got his new orders. Get your forces back to the main base in New York City. Philadelphia was to be abandoned. On June 18, 1778, Clinton's massive army of nearly 21,000 British and Hessian soldiers started to move out. It was a colossal parade, a column of men, horses, and wagons that stretched for miles. They moved slowly, their march made even slower by loyalists who used the opportunity to plunder and burn patriot homes on their way out. Watching this lumbering giant was General George Washington. His Continental Army, now about 14,500 men strong, had just been through the crucible of Valley Forge. A peculiar Prussian officer, Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, had shown up there to find a bunch of separate militias whose weapons, as one soldier put it, were in horrible condition, covered with rust. Von Steuben, a veteran of the elite Prussian army, didn't speak a word of English, but he absolutely spoke the language of discipline. Day after relentless day, he drilled the exhausted, starving men. He taught them how to march in formation, how to load their muskets with terrifying speed and precision, and maybe most importantly, how to actually use their bayonets. He took a ragtag mob and forged them into a professional fighting force. So as Clinton's army snaked across New Jersey, Washington saw his moment. He had a new army, an army itching for a real fight, and a vulnerable British force stretched out right in front of him. The stage was set for a showdown that would test this newfound professionalism to its absolute limit. Washington's war council was completely split. To some of his generals, trying to take on the full might of the British army in a head-on battle was pure madness. The loudest skeptic was his own second-in-command, Major General Charles Lee. Lee, a former British officer with a brilliant but famously difficult personality, argued the Continental Army was still no match for British regulars. He was convinced any attack would be a total disaster. But other, more aggressive officers like the Marquis de Lafayette and Mad Anthony Wayne saw a golden opportunity to land a heavy blow. Washington sided with them. He came up with a plan: send a powerful advance force of about 5,000 men to hit the British rear guard, hold them in place, and then bring in the main army to deliver a crushing defeat. Command of this critical mission fell to Charles Lee, a decision Washington would soon regret. Lee accepted, but he did so reluctantly, still totally convinced the plan was doomed. As the sun rose on June 28, 1778, Lee's force moved towards the British rear, commanded by the formidable General Charles Cornwallis. The fate of the battle rested on the shoulders of a man who didn't believe it could be won. The morning of the 28th was brutally hot. As the American advance force got close to Monmouth Courthouse, things started to get confusing. General Lee's orders were vague, and at times, they seemed to contradict each other. His plan was to outflank the British rear guard, but he never really managed to communicate that to his commanders on the ground. Units started moving without any coordination, and the first American attacks were clumsy and ineffective. The British rear guard, made up of elite grenadiers and light infantry, wasn't the easy target the Americans were hoping for. When he was pushed, General Clinton reacted fast, turning his main column around to back up Cornwallis and hit back hard. Faced with a much bigger and better organized force than he ever expected, Lee's confidence just shattered. He saw exactly what he had predicted all along: a disaster. And so, he gave the order to retreat. But this wasn't an orderly, tactical withdrawal. It was chaos. Different brigades got conflicting information, and what should have been a retreat quickly turned into a disorganized run for it. To the soldiers, the men who had drilled endlessly at Valley Forge, it felt like a complete betrayal. All that new discipline was just evaporating in the morning heat. The professional army that Baron von Steuben had worked so hard to build was now running from the enemy, looking just like the amateur militia the British had so easily beaten before. The great test was here, and it looked like the Continental Army was failing. Spectacularly. As Washington rode forward with the main army, he didn't hear the sounds of a winning battle. He saw his own soldiers in a full, panicked retreat. It was in this moment that one of the most legendary confrontations of the war happened. Washington found a bewildered Charles Lee on the road. The commander-in-chief, a man famous for his composure, was filled with a volcanic rage. According to a general who saw it happen, Washington's fury was so intense that the leaves shook on the tree. He furiously demanded to know what was going on, and in that heated exchange, he basically fired Lee right there on the spot. There was no time for arguing. The British were coming, and the army was about to collapse. Washington's leadership was never more critical. Riding among the retreating men, his presence alone seemed to be enough to stop the panic. He immediately started reforming the lines, his voice cutting through the chaos. He put General Nathaniel Greene on the right flank, Lord Stirling on the left, and put Anthony Wayne in command of the center, using some of the very men Lee had just led in retreat. He had bought them just enough time. What came next was one of the most brutal, grueling fights of the entire war. The temperature soared past 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and soldiers on both sides were dropping from heatstroke. One soldier later wrote that being on the battlefield felt like standing at the mouth of a heated oven. But the American soldiers, their lines now held together by Washington himself, stood their ground. They fought off multiple, ferocious British bayonet charges. That training from Valley Forge wasn't lost. It was now on full display. The air filled with the deafening roar of cannons in what became the largest artillery duel of the entire Revolution. And in the middle of all this carnage, legends were born. This is where the story of Molly Pitcher comes from, a woman, most likely Mary Ludwig Hayes, who supposedly carried water to cool the cannons. When her husband collapsed, she reportedly took his place at the gun. Whether it's 100% fact or partly legend, her story became a symbol of the desperate grit the Americans showed that day. For hours, under a punishing sun, the new Continental Army stood toe-to-toe with the best soldiers of the British Empire and refused to break. As evening came, the fighting finally died down. The field was littered with the bodies of men who had fallen in combat or from heat exhaustion. But the American lines had held. They had taken the best punches the British could throw and were still on their feet. The British, battered and exhausted, pulled back. Washington wasn't done, though. He planned to rest his men and hit them again at dawn to finish the job. He pushed his main line forward, taking control of the battlefield. A huge symbolic victory. The American army slept right there on the field, ready for a final bloody fight in the morning. But when the sun rose on June 29th, the field was empty. Under the cover of darkness, General Clinton had pulled his men out. He saw no point in continuing to attack a strong American position, so he slipped his army away in the night and continued his march to the safety of New York City. The Battle of Monmouth was over. So, who actually won? On paper, the battle was a draw. The British got their army to New York, and the Americans didn't destroy them. American casualties were around 362, while the British lost over 300 men. But in just about every other way that matters, Monmouth was a huge American victory. Washington's army held the field at the end of the day. More importantly, they had met a full-strength British army in a traditional, open battle and fought them to a standstill. The brutal training at Valley Forge had paid off. The Continental Army was now a professional force, one that could stand up to the finest troops in Europe. The battle had a huge impact on leadership, too. For Washington, it was one of his finest moments. It cemented his authority as commander-in-chief and shut down the political critics who had been plotting against him. For Charles Lee, it was the end of the road. He demanded a court-martial to clear his name, but was found guilty of disobeying orders and disrespecting Washington. His military career was over. The Battle of Monmouth often gets lost in the history books, overshadowed by the big surrenders at Saratoga and Yorktown. It didn't result in a captured army or win any new territory, but its importance is hard to miss. It was the last time the main British and American armies would clash in a massive head-to-head battle in the northern part of the country. After Monmouth, the war's focus would shift south. Ultimately, Monmouth was the proof of concept for the American Revolution. It was the moment the Continental Army, forged in the fires of Valley Forge, proved it was for real. It showed the world that American independence wouldn't be won in a single glorious battle, but in the sweltering heat and grim determination of thousands of individual acts of courage on one long, brutal day. If you found this story about one of the Revolution's forgotten turning points fascinating, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button for more deep dives into the history you thought you knew. And let us know in the comments, what other overlooked battle or historical figure do you think deserves the spotlight? Thanks for watching.